What's the single most important feature that a table saw can have? There are a lot of different table saws on the market, and they range wildly in price. Late last year, I posted a video about how I was getting rid of my old table saw because of an ongoing blade alignment issue that couldn't be resolved, and I was looking to replace it. This year, I finally bought a new saw, and a lot of my decision making on which one to get really came down to one key detail. Today, I'm going to share that detail with you and explain why I think it's so crucial. That's coming up next on The Honest Carpenter Show. So I was swapping out my old Dewalt 744 because of a blade alignment issue that was happening specifically when I made bevel cuts. No matter how much I messed with the mounting bracket, the thing would wander out of square and pull my lumber off the fence while cutting. That's dangerous, and it went on long enough that I knew that I had to replace it. So I did a lot of table saw research for the first time in years, and what I found was table saws are really expensive these days. And I guess that's not surprising. It's a big tool with a strong 15 amp motor and a lot of features. Plus, I bought my old model 12 years ago, and everything costs more these days anyways. But if you're dropping that much money on something, you want to make sure that it meets a lot of criteria. So I began scouting the market for my perfect table saw. Now, keep in mind that over the years, I have worked on a lot of random job sites. And on these job sites, I would use saws that ranged drastically in quality. I've worked on high-grade cabinet saws that cost thousands of dollars, and I've used crummy benchtop models that were so underpowered, they would stall out completely when you ripped 2x4s on them. But the funny thing is, no matter which saw I used, I always somehow still managed to get the cuts done. It might have been frustrating to use bad saws, but I would just find ways to make it work. You can slow the cut down, or use a sharper blade, or add jigs and braces for accuracy. But as my solo work became broader and I found myself doing everything from rough framing to custom built-ins, I eventually realized that one table saw feature was utterly critical for me. And if that feature wasn't good enough, then my job became unbearably difficult. So I'm going to explain that feature in depth right now. But real quick, if you're just now learning power tools and you're having a hard time grasping all the essentials, then check out my online course, Power Tools Explained. That's where I take you through the 20 most important power tools step by step. I show you what these tools are for, how to use them safely, and I give a lot of pro advice gathered from my time in the field. That's available right now at thehonestcarpenter.com. So click the link above or down below in the description to find out more. Okay, for me, the most important feature on a table saw, by far, is rip capacity. Rip capacity is the maximum amount of distance that a saw can create between the blade and the rip fence. In other words, how many inches can you rip on the fence side of the blade in one pass? The reason this feature or this capacity is so important comes down to one thing: cutting sheet goods. Narrow lumber like 2x6 material won't really test your rip capacity. Most of the rips we make on lumber like this is well under 12 inches, which nearly any table saw can handle so long as it has a fence. But sheet goods like plywood and MDF come in 4-foot by 8-foot sheet sizes, and breaking them down into smaller boards is notoriously difficult. For instance, say you want to split a full sheet exactly in half. If your saw rip capacity is only 18 inches, then you simply can't do this on your table saw. The widest cut you can make is 18 inches inside the blade and roughly 30 inches for the offcut. If you want a long 24-inch rip, you'll have to put the board on the ground, set up a straight edge of some sort, and begin taking it apart little by little with a circular saw. Definitely not a fast process because it involves so many steps. So for me, if I'm even going to entertain buying a saw, it absolutely has to have a 24-inch rip capacity, or preferably even more. With this much capacity, you can set your inside cut distance right at 24 inches, then carefully pass your sheet fully through the blade and produce a highly accurate half sheet rip. I can't overstate how important this is for speed and precision. So much of what we do in carpentry and woodworking requires the use of sheet goods. Whether we're ripping down OSB sheathing or cutting pieces for custom cabinets, we'll constantly have the need to break down full plywood sheets quickly. Having a plus 24-inch rip capacity makes your job at least 50% easier, and it takes care of so many frustrations. You just set your distance, load your board, and cut. So when I went looking for a saw that had this rip capacity but was still affordable, I finally settled on one. And that was Dewalt's updated version of the same saw I had before. That was my choice. And before you pitch a fit, I'll say right now, Dewalt is not my sponsor. I've never even talked to them before. Their JOBSITE saw is still just the best thing going on the market right now. When I told everyone I was looking for a new saw back in December, I heard a lot of jokes about how I would soon be promoting SawStop because everyone knows that they do a lot of influencer outreach. But I never even entertained getting a sponsor for this video, frankly because I didn't want to get stuck using a saw that I don't like. A good table saw is a very critical thing. It has so many purposes and you'll really wind up using it for nearly every project. And the truth is, Dewalt earned my trust with their table saws because the last one served me well for so many years. I just messed it up when I pranged it on a job site somewhere. But otherwise, it was a great saw. On top of that, their new job site model has improved over the older model because it has an even bigger rip capacity now. The newer 10-inch models have a massive 32.5-inch rip capacity. This means that you can rip almost 3/4 of a full sheet of plywood on the fence side of the blade. And this solves another big problem because ripping narrow pieces from a full sheet has always meant that the big, heavy offcut piece was trying to fall off the table while you're cutting. It can get dangerous trying to manhandle a cut like this by yourself. But being able to put the larger cut section between the blade and the fence gives you so much more stability. The bulk of the piece is better supported by the blade and the inner rail, so you can focus on simply pushing the sheet through cleanly. And the other reason I like this model so much is that the fence is highly accurate for a job site saw and very easy to adjust. Dewalt has been using this rack and pinion fence rail for a while now, and it's just as good on their newer model as it was on the older one. It locks and unlocks with the lever under the table, and the fence position squares itself automatically. This is the other really important feature for me. Some saws use much cruder fences that you have to adjust by hand. It takes a lot of messing around to get them where you want them. And if you're not doing a ton of work, then that's okay. Those saws are generally much more affordable, and I wouldn't tell someone not to buy one. But if you're doing a lot of DIY projects, or possibly even if you're a pro, then the first time you use that rollout fence, you'll think, I can't go back to setting it by hand. The action is so smooth, the accuracy is very reliable, and the range on this model is just incredible. Now, I'm sure woodworkers out there right now are saying, job site saws are never accurate. And I guess it's their right to say that. But that's because they're comparing these saws to cabinet grade table saws, which often run into thousands of dollars and are not remotely portable. Yes, these things may be accurate down to hundredths of an inch, but try moving one to a remote location for work. It's just not feasible. Whereas job site saws, like my Dewalt, are designed to be light and portable. I would literally just carry my old one around and drop it wherever I needed it. I did that for years because it fit so snugly in my truck. I got to have a very accurate table saw on any job site with very little setup time. Now, the one drawback that I'll point out with the newer model is that it seems like you have to buy it with the rolling stand. I'm not sure why, they just packaged the two together, like no exceptions. I didn't necessarily need it because I'm doing so much more work in the shop these days, and I'm not hauling the table saw out to job sites anymore. But having had no choice but to get it, I went ahead and installed the saw on it, and I have to admit that I've come to enjoy it. It's easy to keep it tucked away in the shop, and I can wheel it out anywhere if I really need to. I'm still getting used to the new saw's features, but for the most part, they're very comparable to the older model, just slightly better. I can bevel quickly and cleanly once again, which is exactly what I wanted. And I take advantage of that massive rip capacity every time I'm dealing with a bulky sheet section. I filmed the whole table saw lesson of Power Tools Explained with this model, and it was a breeze. So that's my number one variable for table saw selection. At least a 24-inch rip capacity on a 10-inch saw. It's the feature that I just will not compromise on. Now, this aspect may not be as important for you, and I'm sure there are other job site saws that still cut very well. But for me, coming from a pro background and still doing hobby projects, nothing out there beats this setup. At any rate, that's my 2 cents on the topic. I'll link the saw below along with some others, and be sure to have a look at Power Tools Explained. If you're just now learning Power Tools, it'll drastically speed up the whole learning process. That's available right now at thehonestcarpenter.com. I'm Ethan James with The Honest Carpenter. I'll see you next time.